let's cover what I believe to be the most disappointing and the most surprising movie releases of 2024. Now, I've managed to compile a list of 3 for each category. 3 for the most disappointing and 3 for the most surprising. And to be honest with you, especially when compared to last year, I didn't have many that were that surprising down. If anything, it was more disappointing releases. And without further ado, we are going to kick off with my 3 most disappointing releases of 2024. Let's start negative and then end on a positive note. And of course, it's important to mention that these are just my picks. I know people that have loved the films that I found disappointing and people that have hated the films that I found most surprising. Kicking it off in the most disappointing category is one of the more contentious releases of the year, and that is Alien Romulus, directed by Fede Alvarez. Alvarez being a director whose works I've quite enjoyed in the past, especially his Evil Dead 2013 remake, I thought he could come into the Alien franchise and do incredibly well. So naturally, I was very excited. I mean, we're going back to the Alien franchise. You know, me as a lover of Alien Covenant and Prometheus, films that weren't to everyone's taste, but I thought massively resurrected the franchise in just a brilliant way. But after I watched Alien Romulus, I was vastly disappointed, as I just kind of saw it as a decently, adequately structured reflection of the Alien franchise that kind of only exists as a somewhat uninspired rehash of earlier works, a reminder of the better days. Throwing in a slew of cheap references to remind you of the franchise and aliens, not to mention the digital necromancy that took place, that was a massive disappointment to not just me, but thousands of Alien fans worldwide. In Alien Romulus, there are some great moments of practical work and classically alien-driven thrills, and I do like the ballsy finish, the ballsy final act that takes place. And David Johnson and Kaylee Spaney, who managed to convey a full range of terror. But the issue with this film is that I don't think it manages to strike a good or even decent balance between homage and copy and paste. Next on the most disappointing list, we have what was one of my most anticipated films of the year as a lifelong Lord of the Rings obsessor. And that is, of course, The Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim. Now, let's be honest, a story like this, there was always going to be issues, given that the source material that this story comes from is nothing but a couple of pages, if that. And it does feel like a very shielded and safe attempt at grasping the minor straws left by Tolkien. Similar issues to The Hobbit, but even more so in this instance, where you've got small bits of material stretched out into, in this case, a 2+ hour film that genuinely feels like 4 hours. Spending time with characters that have nothing to cling on to in the way that they are presented. The decision to also use a mix of 2D and 3D with the animation is also just, I found strange. Every time you're met with an almost breathtaking animated backdrop, it's suddenly rendered really janky and odd as the models enter the frame. And there were moments that I enjoyed a little, not to say everything was terrible within this, but moments I enjoyed not in a way that strengthened its standing as a unique work in Middle-earth, but in ways that just reminded me of the original material and the original trilogy. Absolutely one of the year's biggest disappointments. And for my final disappointment of the year, it's actually going to go to Jeff Nichols' new film, The Bike Riders, a film I was really excited for, not only because of the cast that's just an array of stars and talents, But also Jeff Nichols, having previously loved Take Shelter, for example, another film of his with Michael Shannon, I thought I might like this to a similar extent. And don't get me wrong, I think the film itself is fairly interesting, the bike riders that is, but it never really found that sweet spot for me. It's clear that Nichols set out to create this specific somber tone, covering notes and things we've seen in films in the past. So a dismantling of vulnerability inside gangs and groups of men, specifically these kind of biker brotherhoods. A film I think is really well acted as well, which makes it even more of a shame. But aside from adhering to classic genre cliches, it doesn't really have anything fresh or noteworthy to add, in my opinion. Okay, so enough of the negativity, now we move on to more of a positive note, my big surprise of the year. Films I didn't think would deliver nearly as much as they did, and I'm kicking straight off with The First Omen. I mean, listen, this is a modern day horror prequel. We've seen these before, and 99% of the time they end up just rubbish. They end up being just rubbish nonsense, let's be honest. But man, The First Omen, it almost feels necessary. You've got this visually remarkable, audacious, well-balanced film, tone between balls to the wall, foul, grotesque horror, and then also the poignant religious subtext as well. First Omen is a film that really just swept me up in its filthy nature. Surprises round every corner, a lead performance, one of the best of the year, probably the best horror specific performance of the year from Nell Tiger Free. And it is absolutely shocking to me that this is only Arkasha Stevenson's first feature film. She certainly has a very bright future as a director, not just specifically in horror, although I would like to see some more horror from her, but just in general, and this goes down as easily probably the biggest surprise of the year, as I expected virtually nothing and got a great horror. Second on my most surprising movies of the year, a film that I think a lot of people were expecting a lot from, and I actually imagine it to go on a lot of people's most disappointing films of the year. But for me, I just didn't expect anything and I ended up having a great time, and that is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Listen, is it a bit messy at times? Sure, but it's a cool, visually stunning, Avatar-esque, ferocious mess that I just had a great time with. It's a really fun reversal, as we've seen in some of the earlier films, where the apes are the dominant force and they struggle to learn the lessons of their history. And just for me personally, I've always been someone who has preferred just watching merely guys in ape suits, like in the original works. But the motion capture in these films is so incredible. And you've got this revenge narrative that on the surface is pretty fundamental and safe, yet it's still managed to strike that balance between familial emotion and a real feel for the stakes and understanding the stakes. And yeah, it bombards you with a bit too much exposition at the start, but to be honest, I was content just to sit there and absorb the backdrops and visually stunning sequences for hours on end. It's a film that a lot of people felt was too long, but for me it flew by. Maybe not as visually sweeping as Matt Reeves' efforts, which I certainly wasn't expecting, but still a great continuation in the franchise that was a massive surprise. And finally, for my last pick of one of the most surprising films of the year, is actually Joshua Oppenheimer's new work, The End. A film that I actually thought I would like, and that says a lot about how much I loved this. Because on the surface, the plot sounds very silly. You've got this single location, post-apocalyptic musical. And don't get me wrong, it is very silly to a certain extent, but I adored this. I loved this. This made its way into my top 10 of the year, and I definitely didn't expect that. A musical so distinctive, so one of a kind. It's made on reflections of a forgotten existence, a family buried beneath the surface, literally, as well as with their memories, dragging them closer and closer to mental torture and death. You've got George McKay being a standout performance, and then backed with the likes of Michael Shannon and Tilda Swinton. The longer that goes on in the film, more truths and realities come out and come to the surface. So potently powerful, even with these half doting, half just ludicrously silly musical numbers. A breathtaking project full of sadness and big thoughts, and one that has already started to garner a diverse reception. A lot of people hating it, which is more than understandable, and then a lot of people loving it, like me, and it has to go down as one of the biggest surprises of the year. But anyway, there's my picks for the 3 most surprising and the 3 most disappointing movie releases of 2024. Be sure to let me know some of yours below, and with that, I'll see you next time.